And welcome back to America's Hope. I'm continuing now with my conversation with Melissa Ortiz. She is head of the Able Americans Project for the National Center of Policy. Melissa, we were talking about what you do publicly in terms of legislation and looking out for the 61 million Americans that you represent. But what do you go through personally in terms of dealing with your own situation as it's related to being bound to a wheelchair, yet still having the resolve and the hope which you just spoke about to get up every day?
It can be frustrating when I'm trying to get to work and one of the metro elevators isn't working. I knew in 1987 that I was going to live in DC someday, if not my whole life, that someday I would live here because I can travel from my house all the way to Key West in Florida and all the way to Prince Edward Island up north without ever having to get behind the wheel of a car. And since I don't drive for medical reasons, I thought that DC was a pretty great place to live because I could get to work by myself. If the elevator is not working at a station, I have to roll down to the next station down the line and hope it's working there. I am pretty open about my disability and people asking me questions and things like that, but there will come times when people ask me really inappropriate questions or really condescending questions. People will ask me if my husband is my caregiver, and I say, no, we're married, and I show off the beautiful wedding set on my hand, and he shows off his wedding band. And they'll pat on him and say, well, aren't you just noble for taking this on? And he always has to put his arm across me when he does that because I want to snarl and snap and say things that would not be nice. Again, with the marriage thing, I had a cousin who asked me when I got married if I was going to walk down the aisle because I do have some mobility. It's becoming less and less as I age. And we got married in 2002 and I was still reasonably able to walk at that point with crutches. And I looked at her, I said, well, of course I'm coming down the aisle on my crutches. And she said, well, I think it would be better if you just sat on the front row while everybody was coming in and then just stood up.
What?
When
really?
It was time.
Someone?
Yeah.
So
said,
is that ignorance or insensitivity, or is it a matter of both?
Both. It's both. And an unwillingness to think outside the box of their own perception. So I politely informed her that she didn't have to come to the wedding if it was going to make her uncomfortable. And 5 weeks later, we got married to the triumph of bagpipes, and I walked that aisle because it was important to me to be able to do that. Yeah. Had I been in need of using a chair full time, I would have just happily gone right down that aisle in my chair because I was getting married. I was doing something that everybody else does. I was just doing it a little differently. So that was a real triumph. It was a pretty neat moment to just stand there and realize that after being born 2 months early and not having a detectable heartbeat when I was born, and then having a form of meningitis that's supposed to kill you when I was 9 months old, and I'm clearly still here, them telling my parents I wouldn't graduate from high school. My 40-year high school reunion is a year from now. All these things that they said I would not do. No one told me that I could not do these things. So I did them. When it was time for me to go through cotillion training, my mother went to the director of the program and she said, she's coming and she will be invited. And she's a good Southern mother. The joke is that Jewish mothers tell you can do something, and Southern mothers say, you will do something, and they nod their head at you. You must have a Southern mama, so you know.
That's so true.
It is true,
but
it's
so
because of her determination that I live as normal a life and as mainstream to life as possible, that I got to do all this stuff.
It's so true. Melissa, I got to ask you a question real quickly.
Sure.
Based on all the things that you just talked about, unpacking your personal life and how this disability developed, and yet your mother's advice, don't you think America is in need of some good old-fashioned motherly advice? Get your act together, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, left, right, conservative, liberal, get it together and start putting on some hope and get up every day.
where do we agree? Once we get there, let's move out to the things that we don't agree on and see where we can come. I'm covering my face here. See where we can come together, and everybody has to be willing to give up something. You can't die on every single hill. That's also a statement I have to tell myself every morning when I am prepared to go butt heads. And there's some people on the left who would happily meet in the middle. And there's some people on the right who would happily meet in the middle. If we could tone down the rhetoric and just decide that we need to get it together more than we need to be correct.
And Melissa, my friend, that is why I wanted you on this program, because it's all about America's hope, and hope being our common denominator so that we can work together, all sides working together to form a more perfect union. We ain't there yet. And it takes a process.
It is a process, and it's especially true in disability policy. Neither side of the aisle is getting it right. But when we start having conversations, it starts sounding an awful lot like we're saying the same thing, that we want people with disabilities to be fully enfranchised and fully part of the American fabric and have a seat at the table. The question is, how do we get there in a way that is helpful for everybody? And that's what Able Americans is doing, is making that path.
Absolutely. And so what are the next steps in making that path become more crystal clear, lighting it up and making sure that you're shining a light on it so that the policy actually works and has teeth in it?
The most important thing that we're doing right now is we are doing a deep dive into federal disability programs and looking at where the money's going, where it's not going, where it's supposed to be going, and would it be better if we followed, which I personally think would be better if we followed an idea called money follows the person, so that the person with the disability could determine how they're going to use their Medicaid, Medicare dollars to best care for themselves, get the medical care of their choice, the medical equipment of their choice, instead of being told how they're going to spend that money and told how they're going to live their lives. And until we can get that very specific policy in place, I'm not sure that there is a way forward.
And what you talked about sounds like good common sense policy.
It is.
There's another policy you're concerned with, and you've been very vocal about that, and that's the EV, the electric vehicles and things of that nature. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, with electric vehicles, wheelchairs are the original electric vehicle, electric wheelchairs. And I can tell you that no matter what kind of battery you have in your vehicle, if it gets below a certain temperature outside, that vehicle's not going to run, because batteries are just simply not designed to run in the cold. New York City debuted a whole fleet of electrically powered, battery-powered cabs in the early 1900s when this first became a thing, and it didn't work. Fast forward to people with disabilities. If I drive an electric vehicle, it can't handle the weight of my chair. It can't recharge my chair in the way that a fuel-powered car can. It has to have special tires. And bottom line, let's go back to that 75% of 61 million Americans being underemployed or unemployed. They can't afford it. They can't afford it. And in an effort to put everybody in electric cars, the powers that be are going to create an untenable situation for lower income Americans, whether they're disabled, people of color, no matter what their reason for being lower income is. Even some people of not color, they're going to create a situation where they can't get to work, and they can't support themselves because they can't afford to drive their cars.
So what's your message to America in terms of hope? You've talked about the political perspective, how you believe in the Speaker of the House. You're not so much in love with the President of the United States. But what's your message to both of those leaders and all leaders of Congress in terms of moving America forward and understanding and respecting the fact that people with disabilities are living remarkable lives, but they need the help to continue to do that?
The first thing I would say is find somebody who has a disability and get to know them as a human being, as a fellow American, as a fellow human being. Find out what they need. find out if government's the best way to do it, or if living in community, we can all help each other. There was, when we first moved to DC, we lived in the Bloomingdale community. There was a young woman in that community who was a wheelchair user, and every morning, the men who had known her since she was little bitty in her very first wheelchair that looked like something made for a wheelchair Barbie, when it would snow, they would be up at the crack of dawn shoveling her ramp and shoveling the sidewalk to the bus stop so that she could get to school. That's what living in community looks like. They didn't wait for the sanitation department to come and shovel the sidewalks. They got up and did it. For a young man that I know about who's blind, his classmates, he was in a regular classroom because he was found to be of exceptional academic ability. His classmates took turns reading to him. That improved their academic ability.
Wow.
There are ways to do this.
Thank you for your remarkable living, because you are
You always
living.
encourage me. Thank you. I am
thank
living.
you.
I'm not just existing.
Yeah.
And you're not just existing either. You have a life, and that's incredible.
Thank you so much. Melissa Ortiz, right here
Thanks so
on
much,
America's
Kelly.
Hope. Appreciate you so much.
Appreciate you. Have a great day.
You too. God bless. We'll be back with more in just a moment.